Okay, good morning, everybody. So as I had indicated when I put it in the email that this was our topic this week, teen dating can be a terrifying topic to think about. And even as Ms. Gunter said when we were waiting to get started, that it's something that we can feel comfortable talking about with like other people's kids and like, just in generalities, but when it's your own kid, it can get a lot more difficult. Um, and I really like what Connie said, that yes, like it's uncomfortable, but we gotta, you know, talk about that. The tough part, and I totally agree with you, Connie, the tough part, and I definitely found this, is when I have to share my own experiences. And when my daughter asked me, well, when did you start dating? And how old were you when you first had sex? And like that sort of thing. It's like, oh God, I don't want to like literally, because we did have that conversation a couple of years ago. And I was like, let me pour a glass of wine before we have this conversation. Because wow, here we go. It is really, really uncomfortable, but it is so important to talk about. Um, it's something that in like running a high school, a lot of the issues that we have and like, with like personal relationship with kids, dating is a huge thing that happens. And it's just a fact of life amongst high school kids that this is when they start exploring that side of their life. And as much as we try to protect our kids from it, it's there. And so having these conversations is really, really important. So I'm going to let Ms. Gunter kind of take over at this point, and then I'll just chip in with my comments.
So, good morning, everyone. This is a tough topic for me. And, as a mom, it's like in my very perfect world, my kids would say that school's more important than dating and that they're going to date after college. And, in my perfect world, I would get to like tell them who they can date. I wish, I would want them to tell me everything about their experiences. You know, again, in my perfect world, I'd like them to prefer to hang out with me than, dating. And, I would want them to find the perfect girl that wants to spend all the holidays at my house, and these are things that are obviously not realistic. And the truth of the matter is that we don't really have control over a whole lot when it comes to our kids and their feelings and dating. And, in reality, they're going to learn from their own experiences. I can tell all the stories of my, dating past, and they're still going to have to go through it on their own. Kids have boyfriends and girlfriends in elementary school. I hope make sure my son's not listening, but he was in sixth grade, and not only did I find out that he was dating someone, but I found out that he was self-harming in like solidarity with this girl. I'm like, what? So when this all came out, I was like, I take great pride in my open communication with my kids, and I assume that they tell me everything. And it was so like wild that I had not a clue. It just happened that one of my other sons saw his phone and from there. And so in reality, there's so many things that are happening that you don't know. And a couple of years ago, my older goes to Piedmont and had a girlfriend, and I found out through other students, oh, I saw your son kissing a girl behind the gym. I was like, what? Like, I had no idea. So, it was kind of that hard realization of like, maybe I'm not the person they want to talk to about it. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, of like how to be okay with that and let that go, but still, have open communication with them. I didn't tell my parents anything when I was younger. Like, they were not my go-to. And so I have to be okay with that might be the fact for Ethan. So his mentality right now with dating my oldest, he's going to be 18 in a few weeks. And, he's had a couple girlfriends. They were, they never even hung out outside of school. They only texted. He says now that like dating is totally lame and that he'd rather, play sports and do his homework. And it was funny because last night we were talking about his 18th birthday coming up. And the question he asked me like floored me. And I think he was kidding, but he goes, so does that mean I can get a Tinder? And I'm like, what? he's like, I thought you had to be 18 to go on like a dating app. And then he's like laughing. So I think he was half joking, but I'm not sure. So keep that in mind, because I know your daughter's going to be 18 pretty soon. So, you know, for me growing up in the 90s, obviously dating, it was totally different. I met my husband in 1994. I was 15 years old. He was like my first real love. I was 15. You know, we met in our history class. We both played sports together. I knew his mom. I went to a very small private school. His mom was actually our principal's secretary. They knew my family. It was very safe. It was very protected, and, you know, not a lot of worries for my parents, because they knew the family. And, you know, my dad actually like handpicked my husband for me because he had red hair and said he wanted redheaded grandchildren one day. So it was just this whole like family affair. And so it felt like safe. And it's funny to talk like that. Like, you know, when your parents would say like, oh, back in my day, it was very simple. And I kind of feel like that, because dating now is, you know, fast forward to 2021. And it's like, you don't have to leave your house to meet people. You know, you see someone at school, you can find them on, you know, Snapchat, and you don't even need to talk in real life. And so there's all these different ways to make connections with people. I know some kids still meet the old fashioned way, but generally speaking, I had an experience where I had the kids in Disneyland, and I didn't even know this was a thing, but they were like airdropping pictures to other teenagers in the line. And then they would like look for each other. Like, it was just so easy, like casting this net out in Disneyland and like talking to people. And it just blew my mind of like how accessible like other people are. And, you know, what's a little bit scary is like, when I talk to teenagers about who they're dating and how they met these people, a lot of times they tell me, you know, I told my parents it's a friend of a friend, but in reality, I met them on Snapchat. Or I told my parents it's a friend of a friend, but in reality, I hear people all the time saying, oh, I met them playing that game Among Us. I'm like, what? I don't know if you guys are familiar with that game, but it's pretty popular right now. But I'm like, I didn't even know you can like
play that game.
people like that.
I remember, probably like.
So I know I started this off very like doom and gloom, like it's very scary, but in reality, it's like relationships are beautiful. You know, young love is so sweet. And, you know, one day I want to have grandkids, and I want my kids to have somebody that really complements who they are, and that they respect each other, because I think everybody deserves that, and they deserve happiness. And so how do we embrace this like really scary time, and how do we keep our communication open with them, you know? And how do we handle it when we're not the people that our kids want to talk to? So I'm going to ask a couple questions, and if you want to put it in the chat, or you want to say it out loud, or even if you just want to think about it to yourself. And these are going to be very personal questions about your own experiences with dating, and with, you know, currently with your kids, like how you communicate with them. And, you know, when you were younger, how old were you when you went on your first date? I was just thinking that my youngest is now 13, and I had my first kiss when I was 12. That's terrifying. I haven't told them that, but how about you, Ginny? How old were you?
I went on my first date.
Yeah.
I was 14. We went to the movies. His parents drove us.
Okay. Does that feel so young now?
It does. Though, well, and I think Hannah was probably, I don't think she was 14 when she went on her first date. Maybe 15. Actually, I can't remember. I think she was 15.
Yeah.
Might have still been 14 though.
Yeah, I think Ethan was 16 and I dropped him off at the movie. And that was like his one date ever. Anybody else? I don't know if there's anything in the chat. I can't. Oh, there. And so you could just think about it to yourself if you're not comfortable sharing, but, you know, did your parents know about it?
Mine did, because like I said, his parents like picked us up. I mean, it was like this whole thing.
Yeah. So you were open with them about.
So I will say, like, when I was in high school, like, yes, that was my first date, but that was probably my only date that was that formal, where like, you know, like we like went out, like that wasn't something that really happened a lot in high school. Like that
No.
very seemed very quaint. And that wasn't like the rest of high school definitely was not like that.
Like it feels like 1950, right? Like and the next question is, do you remember any specific rules or expectations that your own parents had about dating? Like for me, I remember I couldn't have boys in my room with the door closed. My parents preferred me to go out in groups. I wasn't supposed to have sex until I got married. Like those were the things that my parents expected. I didn't necessarily follow all of them appropriately, but they were very clear and that's what their hope was for me.
For me, my mom had this rule that he would have to come in and meet my parents in order for us to go out, which honestly, now I think about it, I'm like, maybe that's why I didn't go out on a lot of dates. I just didn't want to deal with that.
That was like my dad, like if somebody ever pulled up and honked and you went out there, you'd be in so much trouble. Like the boy is supposed to come to the door and, talk to us. And because I think their idea was if they can't come to the door, what are they hiding? That was kind of how my mom and dad thought about it. So, and then thinking back in dating, like in those younger years for you, like, was that a good experience?
For me, no. I mean, and my mom, she used to say things like, well, you got to keep your legs crossed and things like that. And I'm gonna be completely, I never felt comfortable talking to my mom about any of this. And I didn't talk to her about it. I didn't share with her at all stuff that was going on with me with dating and relationships, because I didn't feel like she would understand. She, just her experiences with dating, like my father was the first person that she had ever really dated and met for her first relationship. And she had met him after college. And so she was a lot older. And so I just felt like she could not relate to the experiences I was having at all. And I did not feel comfortable talking to her about them.
Yeah, it makes sense. Like I have this memory of, my, obviously my husband and I were together since we were 15 years old. And I think I was 22 when we got married. And when I got pregnant, I didn't want to tell my parents I was pregnant because it was like confirming that I had sex. Like it was so I didn't want to have that conversation. I still don't want to have those conversations. And so being able to respect that my kids don't want to have those with me. It was funny because my son wanted to come in earlier when I was going to do this. And I'm like, no, you can't be in here. I'm talking about teen dating. And he's like, what do you know about teen dating? And I was like, what do you know about teen dating? He's 14. And he's like, more than you want to know. And just teasing me, right? I'm like, oh my God, no. So, I think it's important that we validate that their dating experience is going to be different than ours. Because my parents would always tell me oh, I know what it's like. I know. And I'm sure they did, but every generation has different traditions and different, expectations for it. And so making sure that we're not imposing our own thoughts and values on things that we don't actually know about. I don't know what it's like to online date or, all that kind of stuff. And so making sure that they know that I don't know everything about this, but I know enough about relationships that if you wanted to talk to me about it, you could. This next question kind of makes me laugh because
hold on a minute, because I just want Virginia put a comment in the chat that I agree with. I feel like if a child knows their parents will not approve of something, then they will not want to talk to their parent about those things. And I think that's such an important point. That as parents, you put down guidelines, your expectations for your kid, but you have to kind of put out there that you can tell me anything, and I'm gonna not judge. You're gonna be open to hearing what they have to say, because we do want our kids to talk to us about this stuff. But if we put out there that certain things just aren't acceptable and your kid feels like you're not going to approve, they're not going to tell you, because our kids do not want to disappoint us.
No. And I think you're right. It's why am I going to tell my parents something and risk not being able to do it anymore, or, having them throw obstacles to see this person? Because, even if it's somebody that I don't approve of, you know, back in when I was dating, it's like if there was somebody that I knew my parents wouldn't like, I wouldn't bring them around. You know, I wouldn't talk about it because I know that they would throw down obstacles, but no matter what they said, I was still going to do what I wanted to do. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind is like, we can set all these rules. And a lot of times I'll have, you know, kids who are dating and have tried to be really open with their parents about it. And, you know, been like, nope, you're going to school. And that strategy doesn't work because, you know, the heart wants what the heart wants and they're going to do what they want to do. And, you know, it's hard to just listen as a parent when we have so many opinions about a person or just dating in general. It's like, how do we just like listen? And I think that's something to practice so that, you know, kids are going to want to share things with us. It's like, you know, my kids have said things and I don't agree with, and I try to just be supportive and listen. And sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I see so many red flags in this, you know, in this person or in this situation. And, you know, I know that you're not going to care about what I have to say. I'm just going to read this. Okay. This next one is, you know, how would you feel if your teen had a similar dating experience or dating life that you had when you were younger? Would that be something that you would want for your kid? Ginny smirked. Would you be worried? Would you be proud? Would you be grateful? Would you be sad?
I'd be sad. And you know, and it's come true. I mean, I had experiences with dating that were not pleasant. And you know, and I was looking last night at our topics later on, and later in the spring, we're actually kind of going to like go deeper into this and talk about sex and consent, which is kind of taking this into like a deeper relationship. But I certainly had experiences where my consent was questionable. And then I had my daughter, God, like not that long ago, like 7-8 months ago, tell me about an experience she had a couple years ago that was very similar to what I had experienced. And it made me really, really sad.
Yeah.
You know, and I know it sucks. I think a lot of times, you know, teenage dating, they aren't always positive experiences. I mean, I think you want them to be. I think a lot of young adult fiction like make it seem like, you know, it's all like, you know, Twilight and like love and like all that stuff. And it's not. And yeah.
Yeah, and like Virginia pointed out, you know, having an open relationship with her parents, but then having experience of like, you know, violence in a relationship or being pregnant and all these things. And it's, you know, it's hard because as a parent, you have these worries. And, you know, again, I don't want to be like doom and gloom with my kids. I want them to know that dating can be fun and they can be healthy, but those are the realities of relationships. You know, I grew up in a private school. There wasn't very many people, and there wasn't too much going on. And so working in a high school now and learning about dynamics in teenage relationships is a little bit frightening for me. You know, I've worked with several students who are in extremely manipulative and abusive relationships and don't even realize it. And so, you know, as parents, it's like we have to really not just tell them, but show them like what a healthy relationship looks like. You know, it's not okay. I can't tell you how many times I talk to girls, mostly, even boys sometimes as well, but that are like, you know, I'm not allowed to hang out with my friends because my boyfriend gets jealous, or I'm not allowed to do this, or he doesn't like it when I talk to guys, so I'm going to drop out of this club because there's a lot of guys in there that I'm friends with. And thinking they're doing it in like out of love, because, you know, it's almost like flattering for them of like, oh, they love me so much that they don't want to see me talk to somebody else because it really hurts them. And almost feeling like proud of that fact. And when I, you know, point out to them like that power and control over them, it's like they had no idea, because it comes almost like wrapped very beautifully, right? Like, oh, I love you and all these things. And it's like, that's manipulative, that's abusive. If you're not doing your homework tonight because your boyfriend wants to stay up and talk to you all night long, like that's not wanting the best for you. And really trying to convince teenagers, it's like, I know that you're excited about this and I know you like this person and I know you want to please them, but at the expense of yourself, of your mental health, your school, like all these things. And it's almost like, it's like this badge of honor to like give up all these things for your partner. And I can't, like, it literally frightens me because I do see it all the time. And so I think it's important that we are, demonstrating healthy relationships, giving them opportunity to learn about what it's supposed to look like. Because it could be good and it could be healthy, but on the flip side, it could be very scary. One of my biggest worries is, my mother-in-law tells me all the time, she's like, when you were dating my son, my husband, in high school, I used to worry because he would, if you guys got in a fight, he would be sad. And if you, were ignoring him, he would be really depressed. And, I hear moms like, sometimes I knock on my son's door and I hope he's still there. I hope he's still alive because I know he's really depressed about this girl. And the hold that somebody can have on somebody else's heart is it's exciting in some ways, but it is frightening. Like, I worry about heartbreak for my kids. Seeing my youngest like have that much like commitment to this little girl that he barely knew, it scares me. So, I mean, I guess it's part of it. I try to think back on my own experience of when I felt like, really like into somebody, and it was like your whole world in that moment. It just felt so important. And looking back, it's not, but being able to validate for your kids, like, I know what you're feeling right now, because feelings are intense. These are, especially when they're new for you, you've never felt that. If you've never felt the affection of someone else or the attention from someone that you really like, it's like people will do things that they normally wouldn't do to continue to have access to that affection and attention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like stages of dating. And I didn't come up with this myself. This was a couple of years ago, and I was talking to teenagers about like, what does dating look like now? And so I think there was like 3 kids in there that were telling me like, this is what it's like. The first one they said is like, I love to do like social media research, AKA stalking. I want to gather information and make assumptions about someone. And, because I don't need to have a conversation with somebody. I can look at your social media profile in 10 minutes, know who your family is, what you like, if you can spell, what do you like to do? And so that's kind of like the first thing, right? Which is totally new. I never had that experience. And then, it's easy to talk via text or messenger. You don't have to be confident and like approach somebody. Like, can you imagine like back in the day, like walking up to someone and saying, hi, I really like to get to know you. Like, it just sounds so bizarre. And so, not having that makes it pretty easy, actually. So the next step, they said, this is from the kids, if both parties approve, we move into the talking phase. But funny enough, they don't actually have to talk. You can communicate again through direct messages, texts, whatever. And then the last phase they said is, I'm like, so what do you like together? You dating? They're like, oh no, we're hanging out. And I'm like, oh, so that's like the third phase? Like that's like the final phase? And they said, no, hooking up's the final phase, but we're like hanging out. So that means it's like serious and you're not like hanging out with someone else. So, I mean, that could have changed in the last couple of years. I don't know, but it was just kind of fun to pick their brains and, what does it look like for you? The hooking up part is the scary part for me as a mom. I'm not going to lie. I don't like to think about it. Especially with a son who's going off to college next year. So, we're not here to tell you like whether or not you should allow your kid to date, right? Like, this is mostly just to like keep an open mind. If your kid is dating currently and you're not a fan of it, like, good luck trying to stop it. It's like jumping in front of a train, right? Like, you can't make it stop. The more we resist what they want to do, the less they're going to reach out to us. They need your guidance. They don't know what to do or how to act. And, a lot of times people get what relationships look like via television or YouTube or watching their family members. Again, I've had students that end up in these violent relationships and, haven't really learned what it's supposed to look like. And that's something that we don't really talk about. Like, what is a relationship supposed to look like? What is a marriage supposed to look like? What's really sad is there's been quite a few times where I have a student who's in a really bad relationship, and I've actually had to reach out to parents about creating a safe breakup plan. And when I call home, they're like, you have the wrong number. My kid's not dating. And I'm like, no, your kids, date. Not only are they dating, but we're trying to safely get them out of this very toxic relationship. And that's a very scary thing to have to hear as a parent.
I accidentally stumbled on what I personally think is the best way to just kind of talk about relationships and dating in general with your child. And that my daughter and I watched Love Island together. Yvonne, I know I've told you this. It was over the summer and we were watching Love Island together. But it was fascinating to talk to her about her opinions about dating and how people treat each other and what to look for in a partner and respect and things like that. It was just without it being personal because it wasn't somebody she was dating, but just in generalities and see where she was coming from. Virginia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I kind of have a story from just yesterday at work. Me and my coworkers were just having a conversation, and I was telling them how, my 14-year-old has this little girlfriend, he's dating, and how they want to go hang out this weekend. And my coworkers looked at me and they're like, how old is your son? And I'm like, 14. They're like, oh, hell no. Like I wouldn't let my kid. And I'm thinking to myself, first, like, you don't know our relationship. Second, you can't tell me that you were not dating at that age. Like I have to think about it myself. I was dating his dad at the age of starting 13. I didn't have my kids till 20, but it doesn't mean, that I'm a bad parent because I'm letting my son date. Whether I like it or not, they're gonna do it. And if I don't know about it, it may be worse. Yep. Because they're really doing things behind my back, or, things are happening that shouldn't be happening, like toxic things, because I don't know about it and they're hiding even more. So I actually stopped the conversation at that point because I realized like even other parents are not going to understand right away. They're just going to judge, like, how can you allow your child to be dating? But whether I like it or not, he's going to do it.
Yeah. And the reality is, if your kid's telling you that he is dating, that makes you kind of an awesome parent, but you're right. It's like people are going to have those judgments and then not even thinking back about, oh yeah, I was kind of doing that too,
Yeah, I had to explain to my son that when I was dating his dad, his aunt would, when I would stay over at his dad's house, his aunt would really come down hard on his parents, saying, how could you allow this? How can you do this? How can you do that? And then later on in life, she apologized to me after we got married. I was already adult. We had kids, everything. And she's like, I'm sorry. Like, I didn't mean to be so hard on you, and it was heartbreaking, so I had to explain that to him on how not, people are going to judge us, but we just got to do what we do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think good for you for shutting down that relationship with conversation with your coworkers, because don't let other people judge the way you parent. You have a relationship with your child and, use your own judgment on what's going to work and what's not. I mean, when we do these, meetings every week, we give advice and, that sort of thing. But I mean, you got to figure out what's going to be best for your own family and your own relationship. And yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I made choices and allowed my daughter to do things that other people be like, you do what? And
and Ginny and I talk about that frequently of like, we don't consider ourselves very like strict parents. I mean, we're definitely on top of things, but we're kind of tend to be more like you said, you watch Love Island. So on Monday nights, my kids and I, we have Bachelor Monday. And one of the things I really like about watching The Bachelor with the kids is that it brings up a lot of conversation about relationship dynamics. My youngest one is on the autism spectrum, and sometimes social things are a little bit challenging. And so it's really actually cool for me to see him say, like, why would you want to marry someone that talks to you like that? Or why would you want to be on this show when the guy that you like is dating 20 people? Like those kind of things. And that's not a conversation that I would bring up just randomly. So it's like we're able to, like you said, you're able to talk about it, but it's not directly about your kid, it's about somebody else, and just watching and having like all these opportunities for like an hour to talk about dating. And, you know, some people might be like, I'm not letting my kid watch that or whatever. But for me, it's like, these are conversations that I would rather him have with me than just, you know, with his friends or, you know, and it just makes it feel safe, I think, for them to talk about somebody else and not themselves. Because if I ask my kid, are you seeing anyone right now? They will completely shut down and be like, I don't want to talk about it or whatever. And so it's kind of a good way for us to just have those open conversations. So believe it or not, you've already taught your kid how to date. It's time to get a little bit personal. And if you've been in our coffee talks before, you know that we don't really hold back when it comes to like getting personal. So you have been modeling your dating behaviors with your own relationships for your kids. So I want you to imagine that you see your child with their new dating partner and they are treating each other exactly how they have seen you treat your partner. What does that look like and how do you feel? So one more time, imagine you see your child with their new dating partner and they're treating each other exactly how they have seen you treat your partners. How do you feel and what does that look like?
Oh no.
And maybe they haven't seen you in a relationship or whatnot, but I might be worried, I'll be honest. Yeah, I might, I don't even know if I want to like expound on why I would be worried.
Well, I can tell a little story this morning. This happened 2 hours ago.
Okay.
2 hours ago. I was leaving the house and I had, you know, we've got by the front door all of our masks, right? You know, for when you leave the house. And I had, you know, we have all our fabric masks and I had recently gotten some surgical masks. And I told my husband, like, hey, I put these by the front door because he's the one that always does the grocery shopping. Because I don't like crowded places ever. And like even before the pandemic, like he did the grocery shopping. So I was like, hey, I have these like surgical masks. When you go to the grocery store, I want you to start double masking because they're saying that you should double mask now when you go out in public because of like, you know, these variants, the coronavirus, and they're super contagious. So I want you to double mask. And he like had this look on his face like, oh my God, you love me, you care about me. And I was like, I really need to be more affectionate and like obvious that he's important to me because he had this look on his face like, thank you. And I'm like, oh my God.
He just needs a hug. Oh my gosh. I don't know if that's funny because like if I were to say the same thing, because I just, you know, I love Dr. Fauci and he said double mask. So I'm like double mask. I have a hard time getting my husband to like keep his one mask over his nose, right? And that's like a fight all the time. And you know, like, you know, we've been together for so long. We've been together for like over 20 years. And so we are very secure in our relationship. But what I forget sometimes is like we were arguing about money or something the other day. And my kid comes in my room and his eyes are kind of watery. And he's like, why do you and dad have to fight in the morning? It's so annoying. But I can tell he was like really hurt by it. And so I had to be really cautious of like conscious of like, oh my gosh, like the security of our relationship is very like powerful and meaningful to him. And so he might not understand that like we're fighting about something dumb and we'll be over it in like 10 minutes. He was like really hurt by it. And so, you know, I think if I saw that with my kids and their partners, I would think like, oh my gosh, there's better ways to talk to one another. There's healthier ways to communicate. You know, you don't have to yell at each other. I'm kind of stubborn. And so sometimes I can give like the silent treatment for like 48 hours. Like if I saw somebody doing that to my kid, I'd be really mad. You know, I'm not gonna lie. Or I'm, you know, I get irritable. It's like, you know, and I'm sure like everyone else, it's like I'm cooking, I'm cleaning. I wake up this morning, there's dishes in the sink. And then I'm just really snappy with my husband. And, you know, and it actually, when I think about like, if I saw that with my own kids, that would make me really sad. So that's what I'm modeling. And, there's good times too, but I have to be really conscious of like, that's not like, how do you like do something that's not good and then tell your kids like, oh, that's not okay. It's like, well, it was okay for me. So they're watching us and they're really, learning. And, a lot of times I see as they get older, they say the same things my husband says. And my husband's a very direct person, not very touchy-feely. And, I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, your wife, you're gonna, it's gonna be that you can see like the dynamics are gonna be very similar when they get older because they have similar personalities, right? And it's scary. Like so I know for me, I need to do a better job at, demonstrating what a healthy relationship looks like. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not perfect. But letting them know that like this is how you treat people that you love. So I'm going to move into like dating rules. Does anyone have current dating rules for your kids?
I don't. And I don't know if I ever really did. And a lot of that came from, again, my relationship with my mom and like her, like kind of setting down these rules and me feeling like because of those rules, I could never talk to her
Right.
about my relationships. So I guess, in my own rule is I want, and this is mostly my daughter because my son's 11. So he's actually told us that he is asexual and a relationship. I can't remember how he phrased it, that he doesn't want to date.
Like a romantic.
A romantic, thank you. So I haven't had any strong rules, though I will say, and Yvonne and I had talked about, bringing in same-sex relationships. My daughter is gay, and she does have a girlfriend. And I will be completely honest that I am totally fine with her locking herself in her room with her girlfriend for hours because I know she's not going to get pregnant. And I know that may be hypocritical of me, but it is just like, oh, well, it's fine. And I just, it's a choice I make.
Yeah. And as I was reading about like parenting and same-sex relationships, that was one of the things, like the double standard of like being alone in a room with a girl. And so then it brings out like, what is your worry? Like, what is my worry if my son took a girl into the room and closed the door? That they're having sex and somebody's going to get pregnant, right? Like that's the worry. That's a tough one. And we'll definitely get into that and to same-sex relationships and,
Virginia has a hand up.
Yeah.
So I just have a couple rules for him. First is respect. I tell him you respect yourself, you respect her, and you respect all parents involved, which is her parents and us. Responsibility, be responsible. You're going to do whatever you want anyways, whether I say you can or you can't. So be responsible. If you need extra condoms, you ask me. I'll get them for you.
Mm-hmm.
And do well in school. Those are my 3 rules: respect, responsibility, and school. School comes first. If I start to see your grades drop or whatever, all communication is going to be taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been pretty good about staying on top of things. And I said, and you're free to have your relationships or do what you want.
No, I think your rules like cover all the grounds, right? Like just that one of like respect, what does that mean and what does that look like? And I like that you brought in like both families, right? Sneaking around is not respecting somebody else's family, right?
I like them too because it's not just rules about dating. Those are like life rules, right? Like with everything, like every aspect of life. And it kind of, Connie put something in the chat. I worry that setting rules will just make kids want to break them and wanting to rebel against the parents. And that's totally true. Kids absolutely will do that. If you tell a kid, like, that's why, like in high school, like with dress code, like, get rid of the, a couple years ago, I was at the APA, which is in charge of discipline at Independence High School. Well, actually, not more than a couple years ago, it was a while ago. But we got rid of the hat rule while I was there. And it was like, God, we spend so much time like tracking down hats and like kids wearing hats, and it's so dumb. It's such a waste of time. And then what we found when we got rid of the hat rule is at first kids were wearing hats left and right. and then they stopped wearing hats because they weren't breaking a rule anymore and they didn't really care about it. And
Yeah.
so teenagers will try to break rules. They absolutely, that's part of being a teenager, is they go into rebel. And so if you have a ton of rules, rather than what Virginia has are just like guidelines for life, then I like Virginia's approach.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you brought
Well,
that.
one thing that really worries me, right now is because we're in a pandemic and this little girlfriend he met online. So my whole thing is, I told him no sexting. I don't want to see your private parts. I don't want to see her private parts anywhere on the internet.
Yeah.
And that's something I think I have to worry about the most right now.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. And again, I don't know
So
if
that's where I'm like, respect.
Yeah, I don't, yeah, exactly. Like that falls under the respect in, because I don't know if that's, I wouldn't really call that a rule as like good life advice, you know, like don't put that stuff on the internet.
That's definitely something you don't want to learn a tough lesson on. I've had to support many people through that decision to do that, and it's definitely not fun when your parents see something like that. So just respect yourself enough to not have to go through that. And Connie, when you're talking about the rules, I have this like list of like the do's and don'ts, and the first one is like, if you're setting rules or guidelines, make sure you're collaborating, and it just makes them like a little bit of buy-in, like, hey, what do you think is fair? You know, why might I feel nervous if you were to shut the door? Like having those conversations, but letting them be a part of that. And, you know, I do hear it all the time of like, you're not dating. And I'm like, ooh, you know, as the family therapist or whatever, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you can't. I mean, you can say that, but good luck, right? Good luck with that, because they're going to do it anyways. You know, keep that dialogue open. Again, this is just kind of the list of the do's and don'ts. Make sure that you're, you know, listening without judgment. You know, one of the keys of listening is, you know, listen to really hear them. Don't listen just so you can formulate your own response, right? Just really try and hear. And don't freak out. That's the best way to shut down a conversation. That's a hard one for me, you know. Like I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, and I haven't had the experience yet of my kid dating somebody that I, you know, have a lot of red flags about. That's like a whole nother issue. And you know, like for me it's hard because, you know, he goes to the same school I go to. I know a lot of the people. If he were to want to date someone that I knew a lot about, of course I couldn't share that information. That would be really tough, you know. And how do you, you know, if your kid's making decisions that are not decisions you would want them to make, like how do you support that? You know, and again, it's like keeping that dialogue open, talk about it, you know, discuss healthy relationships. You know, it might be a weird question, but like, what do you want in a relationship? Like why do you want a relationship? Are there any deal breakers, you know, in a relationship? um like, you know, my hope would be like, physical violence is a deal breaker. You know, is cheating a deal breaker? Is emotional abuse a deal breaker? You know, what are those things? Because you need to be prepared, because once your emotions and your feelings are involved, it's really hard to set boundaries. You're already there. And, you know, we really want to help them create high expectations of a partner. I hear kids all the time, like, I don't want to be too picky, but, and I'm like, you know, I see how picky you are with what you wear. I need you to be like 10 times that for who you're going to date. And, you know, they like what feels good in that moment. And sometimes they're just not thinking clearly about it. So making sure that they have expectations. You know, one of the things I do with people who are dating or even in a current relation, like, or in a current relationship, is we list out things of like, tell me about the perfect partner. You know, tell me what that looks like. You know, what do you want in someone? And then we'll do like pros and cons. I have like this big butcher paper in my office, and we'll do like pros and cons of the person that they're in a relationship with. And it's really easy to see on a board of like, whoa, my pros list is this big and my cons list is this big. But again, once their hearts are already involved, it's hard to scale back. It's hard to remove yourself from that relationship. So this next part is, raise your hand if you've ever enjoyed a conversation about sex with your own parents. not going to happen, but still our job to educate them about STDs and pregnancy, and even not, I don't want to say even more than that, but like the emotional toll that sex can have on the relationship. You know, when students have had sex for the first time, or they have a partner, like the emotions intensify by like 100%. The jealousy increases, the kind of neediness increases, like all these emotional things that happen when students take relationships to that next level that they're not necessarily prepared for, can be really, really scary, right? And, you know, I don't want to be the naive parent that's like, oh, my kid's not having sex. I mean, right now he doesn't leave the house, so I don't think he is. I hope not, because that means somebody's climbing in a window, but, you know, oh, I just wrote a note to myself that says, oh gosh, this is like one of the worst days of my life. I wish I would have been more open with my parents. I was already probably 20. And my mom is so sweet. She used to put money in my purse. And I walk into my bedroom and there's like money scattered on the floor. And I'm like, what happened? Well, my mom went to put money in my purse, found condoms. I can picture her like walking backwards and dropping the money and running out of my room as I think what happened. And, you know, we never had those conversations. We never had a conversation about safe sex. It was like, you know, I grew up in a Christian home, so it was like abstinence, abstinence, abstinence. And it was like, I didn't have the freedom to talk to her about it because I knew that her expectation that I wasn't having sex at all. So when that did happen, it was, I know it was traumatic for both of us, you know.
I never had a conversation about sex with my mother. I'm 47 years old. Like, I didn't have one when I was a teenager. I have not had one with her at all in my entire life. I have had them with my daughter. Like I told you guys, like I had to get the glass of wine. We had it, you know, we had the conversation. And we've had many conversations to the point now that my daughter will like joke about sex with me, and I'm like, oh, I'm not comfortable with that.
I'm not ready for that. Or I don't know if when you were younger, like if there was like a sex joke, I didn't want to laugh in front of my parents because then they would know that I knew what that meant. Like I think my kids are kind of in that phase right now. Or it's just
like sometimes it's like too much communication.
Like, over communication. So I want to talk a little bit about consent. And you know, doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, like anything like that, because it's so important in so many relationships. And you know, I had a situation where a little couple, they were young, were dating, and at lunchtime, I think he like put his arm around her or something and put his hand on her knee. I don't know what it was, but it was very she wasn't ready for that. And it escalated into something bigger. And I think to the boys, his defense was like, well, we're dating. That's what dating people do. We touch each other. And that was his idea of what dating was and not hers. And so, you know, with my kids, I always tell them like very clear about consent and not just sex, like anything, touching, anything like that, because anything can be, you know, interpreted into something that's bad. You know, maybe his intentions were good and, you know, that's not what she wanted. You know, we always focus on telling, you know, our boys, like, you know, make sure you get consent before you have sex with somebody or do this. But, you know, we also need to be teaching them, all the kids, about like how to say really clear no's. You know, I tend to be a very like passive person. I'm not very like direct in my talk, and very like fluffy. And so I know when I was younger, like my consent was never like very clear, right? It was like, okay, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, really teaching them that it's okay to be strong in what you say and what you want and communicating that clearly. You know, no matter how innocent you think something is, it's like we have to be sure that the other person is okay with it. You know, it's like my nightmare is to have my son get into some legal trouble because of some, you know, situation that he didn't get clear consent, or, you know, cross the line that maybe he didn't even know was there. Like those things for me are frightening. Like I want to make sure that I'm covering everything, you know, and I always tell them like, you talk about it, you don't make any assumptions. If there's any substances involved, don't even go there because you can't consent when you're drunk, those kind of things. And my kids are not like out and dating. So to them, those conversations seem very like dramatic and strong, but it's like, I want to have them because when that situation comes up, I want them to be prepared for it.
Yeah. And like I mentioned a little while ago, we're going to do a separate topic on consent, just focus on that and how to have those conversations. But that is a very, very good point that we need to be having it not just with our boys, but with our girls. And, absolutely. And starting really young. Like my husband and I had a conversation just the other day, with our 11-year-old Nathan. Like we need to be starting to have those conversations with him.
About, and I know we're like running short on time. There's a couple things I want to cover, and one was, social media. Again, it's like 10% of teens that took a survey said that they've sent flirty, sexy pictures of themselves. And I used to carpool with some teenage girls, and they would say like, it would not be a regular weekday if I didn't get a picture of male genitalia. Like it just happens. And so, being really aware and clear and like telling them what they do in those situations, I think is super important. There was one more thing I really wanted to cover: sexual orientation. And I think it's important because we make assumptions, right? Like I assume I'm going to have 3 daughter-in-laws one day. I don't know that for certain. And so I want people to be prepared for that conversation in the event that your teen does come out to you. I want you to be prepared to how you're going to respond. And, in my line of work, I've seen so many responses that are so detrimental. And, I think because our LGBTQ kids are so much more vulnerable in their mental health, like I think that it's so important that we are prepared to be ultra supportive if your kid does come out. And I'll let you speak a little bit to that, Jenny, before we wrap things up, because I think it's really important.
Yeah, it is really important. And my daughter, like I said, she is gay, though she has dated boys. We went through a period where, she thought maybe she was bisexual, but and we've settled on like no, which is good because like one thing I pointed out to her, when she was trying to figure this out, I'm like, Hannah, every time you date a boy, like you have so much anxiety and like there's so much drama and you just don't seem happy. But when she dates a girl, she's so much happier. Like that said a lot to me. But that's actually the reason, like, she didn't necessarily come out to me. I actually asked her if she was gay. Because she was going on a date with this boy and she had such anxiety about it. She was dreading it. She was like, I don't want to. And I'm like, well, then don't go. She's like, no, I have to go. Like, we're just going to go out for coffee. Like, this was a couple years ago. And, I hadn't, like, they left and she was only gone for like 45 minutes. And like, I was saying to my husband, I'm like, God, do you like, it's so weird. She's like so anxious about this and like, just doesn't feel good. Like, I'm like, I think she might be gay. And Paul, my husband, was like, no. And I'm like, dude, I think she is. So she came home and, she was talking to me about the date and she's like, I don't know. I just don't really like him. I just didn't feel comfortable. And she's like, I don't know. I just don't know if I should date. I don't know if I like it. And I asked her, I'm like, Hannah, do you actually like boys? And she's like, and she honestly, it was like so heartbreaking. She burst into tears and she's like, I don't think so. And I'm like,
oh.
like we had this moment, I'm hugging her and like it just, I think it's important to be in tune with your kids. And like when she and I, we've talked a lot about it since then. And she's told me like I think she was a sophomore when that happened. All the years are melding together, especially with the pandemic. It's hard for me to like keep track of time now. And she's told me since then that like she's known since middle school, and I'm like, but and I like told her, I'm like, but you know that Dad and I wouldn't care. I mean, we're really liberal and like, very like pro equality and pro gay rights and that's our household. And she's like, I know, I just didn't feel comfortable like saying it. I just wasn't ready to say it. And so just realize that with your kids, like you may have suspicions and kind of like, I think this is what's happening. They may not be ready to talk to you about it. You can do what I did, just flat out ask them. And I don't know how they respond, but like, yeah, being prepared. It's something that I think I always tried to do it before, but now when I have conversations with my son about his future, though he says he's aromantic, so who knows, but I try to respect that, like, well, it's okay, Nathan, but I try very hard not to put a gender when I talk to him about his future partners. I try very hard to do that. My parents don't, and so other family members don't, but
yeah, that's kind of like what Virginia was saying, is like she had to have that conversation with her husband, because it's, not everybody feels the way that we do, and I totally respect that. Like I grew up in a very conservative home. My dad is very, I don't want to say anti-gay, but like I would be worried. Same with my in-laws, and it's funny because my kids are like, you don't have, if you're talking about dating, mom, you're not supposed to just assume that they like girls. And I'm like, oh, it's a social worker kid, good job. But then if I were to say that in front of my parents and my in-laws, they're like, eh. So it's hard because, I think one of the biggest things you can do for your kid is, I don't want to say defend, but kind of like stand up for them with other family members if need be, and let them know that like that you support them fully. It wouldn't be okay to say like, okay, we're not going to talk about being gay in front of your grandma, because that's not full support. I think it's important.
That's tricky too, and I know we're going over time a little bit, but the thing about coming out and being gay is they don't just come out once; they have to do it over and over again, and that's rough because as a heterosexual person, like in your relationship, you don't have to always say like, oh, I'm dating a boy, and like that's like, because like there's just assumptions, and
or I hate when people say like, well, you don't know that yet, you're only 15.
Yeah,
I'm like, no, I know I liked boys when I was in kindergarten, so how is it different?
And so coming out to other family members like that, that's a difficult thing, because that just happened recently in our family. Like at Thanksgiving, my daughter came out to my parents, and my parents were so stunned and shocked. They didn't even know what to say. And I felt like, I feel like I should have prepped them.
So like to protect. Yeah.
Disappointing for my daughter, their reaction, because they were just like, I don't know what to do. So
yeah.
This is actually probably, I feel awkward stopping here. This maybe is
I mean, and the way we can really end is just like, being open-minded and being a good listener and being supportive no matter what they decide, and knowing that you don't have so much control as much as we think we do, and remembering to like model that healthy behavior, talk about things, talk about the hard stuff, if you need to watch a show with them to have those conversations, do whatever you need to do, but let them know that you're open to listen, that you're open to be, non-judgmental, whatever they tell you. And it's a tough subject. I mean, we could talk about it forever because it is a little bit frightening, especially when it, it comes to your babies. Like your babies are growing up, and that's a hard thing to deal with, whether they're gay or they're straight or they don't want to date anyone or whatnot, just being constant support for them no matter what.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate, this was a great conversation. It was very therapeutic for me. I appreciate it. But starting next week, we're doing our book club. So hopefully you guys have been reading this book. We're enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to that.
The first chapter, I was like, ooh, I got a lot of work to do.
I've been telling my husband, Paul, I'm going to need you to read this book when I'm done with it.
Totally. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful week.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're so welcome.